Hi, I'm Nancy Jacobs. I'm a professor in the Brown History Department, and this is Faces of Brown Research. I'm an environmental historian, so I'm always looking for non-human actors. And the book I'd written before this one was called Birders of Africa, and it was a cultural history of people who knew birds, Black people, white people, Europeans, Africans, scientists, lay people. And that was really interesting to me, but the birds were always objects of knowledge. They weren't really subjects of their own lives. So I was looking for a project where the birds could be actors, and that's how I came on gray parrots. Well, no, that's not how I came on gray parrots. I was looking for a project where I would find animal actors, and I was looking hard. I didn't know what they were. And then I was walking through India Point Park one evening, and I saw a guy going by with a gray parrot on his shoulder. And I looked at him, and instantly, because I'd done this history of bird knowledge in Africa, I knew that bird had a history. And that bird was here. I knew it was a global history, and I knew I could write it. So just seeing that one bird made me think of this subject that otherwise I wouldn't have thought of. Very often, people have assumed that history is only about humans, that only humans have acted in consequential ways in the past, and the only stories in the past that are worth telling, that we can tell about, are about people. And environmental historians challenged that, and we started talking about how nature was a force, how nature structured our lives. But I think we're going a bit further than that. We're looking not just at nature as a broad force, but we're looking at non-human entities as actors. And I'm doing it with animals, and it's quite easy with animals because they're recognizable actors. They're individuals who do things and have feelings and understand things. But I'm putting that in history. To put it in history means we're thinking about it in context. So I'm thinking about the experience and the behavior of parrots in different historical contexts and how they interact with people. The more than human perspective wants to erase the boundaries we've drawn around people as the only legitimate subjects of history. It wants to show that we as humans are so embedded in the rest of the world with all other entities. We live in animal bodies. We have all sorts of microorganisms in our bodies. We're dependent on the water and the air we take in. We're not bounded from them. We eat plants and animals. Not only that, we live with them. They shape our lives. They make our life possible when we farm them. And we have social relationships with them. They're objects of our knowledge. They're important to us. We think about them a lot. So it's a history that foregrounds people's interactions with non-humans, and in my case, with this particular species of parrots. So I'm an environmental historian, and in my previous books, I wrote about how nature influenced people, and I also wrote about what people knew about birds, about nature. And in this one, I want to show that people and animals, these gray parrots, have political relationships, that we interact in ways that have stakes, that we come to each other with particular powers, particular interests. We follow strategies. We have expectations. We have needs. In the politics between people and birds, there's a real power imbalance when we put them in cages. There's a real power imbalance. But the birds aren't powerless, and they're determined, and they're able to influence us. So that's what I mean when I talk about non-human politics, or more than human politics. A lot of the book is just about the relationships that people have with the parrots. So it starts off with people having relationships with wild parrots and how they're interacting with them. I don't know that they really, those birds are wild at that point. They don't need people's help. It moves on, though, and talks about the parrots who are kept in cages. And a lot of my book is about how those can be better and worse relationships, how the parrots have particular needs and how people have really misunderstood those needs. So I think the first thing that people would want to do if they want to become involved in parrots is, if they keep a parrot, really inform themselves about the best way to keep a parrot. And in my book, I'm studying the long and slow history of how people figured out how to live with birds in cages. And I'm also writing about the dawning realization that it's probably really not very good for the birds at all to keep them in cages. And I'm hoping that my book, reading it, that people who read my book will decide that they don't want to keep a parrot in a cage. So at that point, what can people do? And I'd say support conservation, support preservation of forests, support good livelihoods for people who live in the forest so they don't have to capture and sell the parrots, and support the parrot sanctuaries where the cast-off parrots who can no longer be successful pets are living. This species was declared endangered in 2016. So from 1975 to 2016, there were limitations on how many could be traded. But after 2016, CITES, the Convention for the International Trade in Flora and Fauna, CITES declared it would be illegal to trade any wild-caught gray parrots. So that's been going on since 2016. And but it still happens. It still happens, and they're still being smuggled. So the home range is in West and Central Africa, and some West and Central African governments are trying to protect the parrots. Just last week, some were caught by customs officials in Nigeria. Someone was trying to smuggle them out of Nigeria, and the Nigerian government stopped it, and that was publicized. The government of Uganda has prosecuted people who have smuggled them in from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So these African governments where the parrots live are working to conserve them. Some are doing it more thoroughly and in a more dedicated manner than others, but Nigeria and Uganda have just scored these successes. As far as other governments go, I think we have to be vigilant about imports. The United States hasn't imported any legally imported wild parrots since 1993. So the U.S. has had a ban. The EU has had a ban since 2007. The United States implemented its ban because of conservation. The EU implemented its ban because of avian influenza. They were worried about bird flu. But one way or the other, it became illegal to import any parrots into the U.S. or the EU. But they're still produced here, mass-produced. Since it's been illegal to import parrots into the United States, there's been more breeding. And some of it is mom-and-pop breeding in the backyard, but some of it is on a large scale and something that's close to factory farming. You've heard of puppy mills for pet puppies. There are also parrot mills for pet parrots. When I went to Uganda 2 years ago, I went to watch parrots with a man named Nick Bayeba. And Nick was a bird guide. And during COVID, he didn't have any clients, so he just decided to learn about the birds in his region. And he spent months walking around finding all the birds and noting where they were and what they ate. And when I'd been to Kenya and Cameroon and Ghana and rarely seen any birds. So I went to Uganda, where I was told that Nick could show them to me. And I followed him around, and I got to watch the birds for the first time. That was really great. And Nick was just starting to bring tourists and researchers to look at the birds, and just starting to demonstrate to the people who live in this area. It's near Bigoti, the city of Bigoti in Uganda, to show the people who live near Bigoti that there was an interest in the parrots. And Nick's now started to organize folks who live in that area, particularly the farmers. And these parrots, they won't eat the farmers' food. They're not interested. They don't eat maize, but they love some fruit trees. And there's some trees there, the oil palm fruit, that the people don't do much with, but they've got the trees around. And sometimes they've tended to cut them down just because they didn't have any use for the trees. And Nick's been saying, no, preserve those trees, keep those trees for the parrots. And the farmers he's talked to are quite amenable to that. They can see the sense of preserving a habitat for the parrots, and they can see the possibility that folks might come from around the world, and that might be good for their community to have tourists coming in. So Nick is organizing people. He calls it the Parrot Tree Protectors Association in Bigoti, Uganda. It's near Chibali National Park. So, this is a really recent, it's a really recent development, and it's very local, and there's not a lot of money involved, but it's based on the goodwill that these farmers have toward parrots, and Nick telling them that perhaps it can also help bring some other people in to look at them.